Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a situation where the next 24 hours could absolutely rock the price of silver. We're talking a potential 10% swing either way. Now, this isn't about some long-term forecast. It's about a single incredibly high-stakes deadline that has the entire market holding its breath. All right, let's get right into it.
We are focused on one single critical moment. The clock is really ticking here, and pretty much everything we've seen happen in the silver market for the last 2 weeks, it's all been leading up to this one specific date.
So let me just start with a question for you. What do you think is the single most important number to be watching in the silver market right now? Hint, it's not the gold-silver ratio, and it's not the inventory levels.
And no, it's not a price. The most crucial variable in this whole equation, the thing that could change everything, it isn't measured in dollars and cents.
It's a date, April 21st. That's the big deadline for the US-Iran ceasefire. It's the day it either gets extended, gets replaced by some kind of new deal, or it just expires. And whatever happens then is the trigger for everything that's coming next.
So to really get why this one day matters so much, we have to rewind a little bit. We need to look back at the incredibly wild 8 days that got us to this point, a period where silver just skyrocketed from around $74 to over $81.
Okay, what's so fascinating here is just how directly you can tie the price to the news headlines. Look at this. April 8th, a ceasefire gets announced, and bam, silver explodes almost 7%. Then, just 4 days later, the talks collapse, and whoops, silver drops 2.4%. Then, they start talking again behind the scenes, and it surges right back up. By the 17th, it hits a peak over 81 bucks. But look at the end there. As we get closer to the deadline, the price starts pulling back. That tells you the market is getting nervous. People are cashing in some chips before the clock runs out.
So, why is everybody so nervous? Well, it's because the market is trying to make sense of 3 completely different signals coming from the key players, and they're all pointing in opposite directions as we barrel towards this deadline.
On one hand, you've got President Trump sounding super optimistic, right? He's suggesting a deal is so close that they might not even need a formal extension. This is the positive signal the market has been rallying on.
But then, at the exact same time, you get a completely different story from Iran's foreign minister. He's accusing the US of negotiating in bad faith. Words like maximalism, which is basically making extreme demands, and shifting goalposts. That does not sound like a deal is just around the corner.
And then, to top it all off, you get a third voice, Vice President Vance, who basically puts all the responsibility right back on Iran. So you've got optimism, you've got pessimism, and you've got this vague, ambiguous statement all at once. The thing is, both of these stories can't be true, and tomorrow we're going to find out which version of reality is the real one.
Look, this isn't about trying to predict the future with a crystal ball. It's about being prepared. So let's break down the 3 most likely scenarios for what could happen tomorrow and how the market might react to each one.
Okay, so here's the framework. Scenario 1, the most likely at 55%, is we get a deal, or at least an extension. This is what the market has been hoping for. If this happens, oil prices probably drop, the dollar gets weaker, and the price target for silver moves into that $83 to $91 range. Scenario 2, with about a 30% chance, is a total collapse of talks. The blockade tightens, oil spikes, and silver could fall right back down to that $72 to $74 range and fast. And then there's the third one, the real wild card, an extension but with no deal. In that case, nothing really gets resolved, and silver could just get whipsawed between 76 and 83 bucks for weeks. Total chaos.
But here's the thing. This whole geopolitical drama isn't just happening in a vacuum. This deadline is set against the backdrop of 2 incredibly powerful forces in the market that could just pour gasoline on the fire, no matter what happens tomorrow.
The first major catalyst is something that honestly almost nobody is talking about. There is a historic tightness, a real squeeze in the physical silver market. Just look at this number, 762 million ounces. That's how much physical silver has been drained from global stockpiles since 2021. And we're not talking about paper contracts being traded back and forth. This is real, physical metal that's been used up and hasn't been replaced.
And this, right here, illustrates the problem perfectly. It's all about leverage. The COMEX, which is the main futures exchange, has about 77 million ounces of silver that's actually available for delivery. But there are over 571 million ounces worth of paper claims or promises against that small pile of metal.
So what does that mean?
Well, it all boils down to a coverage ratio of just 13.4%. That means there's only enough physical metal to cover a tiny fraction of all the paper promises out there. If a wave of new buyers rushes in after a deal and says, "I want my physical silver," that tiny pool of available metal is going to get squeezed and squeezed hard.
Now, for the second hidden catalyst, the US dollar. You have to understand, every major silver bull market in modern history has needed a weaker dollar to help fuel the fire. See, silver is priced in dollars all over the world, so if the dollar gets weaker, it just takes more of them to buy the same amounts of silver, and that's exactly the trend we're seeing right now. And the dollar's been weakening for a few key reasons. First, all this optimism about peace makes people less likely to hoard dollars as a safe haven. Second, the Fed is signaling it's probably going to keep rates on hold, which isn't great for the dollar. And third, and this is a big one, the US is paying an insane amount of interest on its debt. We're talking over $500 billion in just 6 months. That puts a lot of long-term pressure on the currency. A peace deal tomorrow would just throw fuel on all three of these fires.
Okay, so how do we wrap all this up? What is truly at stake here in the next 24 hours? Let's get to the main takeaway.
The source material we reviewed used a fantastic metaphor that just nails this situation perfectly. The whole ceasefire deadline, all the geopolitical news, that's just the match. The real story, the much bigger deal, is the underlying condition of the physical market. That's like a room just full of gasoline, waiting for a spark.
And this puts it even more bluntly. The big structural issues, that physical deficit, the low coverage ratio, the weakening dollar, they've basically built a bomb in the silver market over the last few years. The news that comes out on April 21st, that's just the detonator.
The market is absolutely coiled for a massive move, one way or the other. All the big structural forces are in place, the catalyst is just hours away. Tomorrow we find out what gets detonated, so the only question left to ask is, are you prepared for the outcome?